All right, everybody, and good morning to everyone who has joined our virtual symposium or seminar for the conference. So I'm Alison McLetchie, and I am a member of the secretariat, and I am really, really excited that you all get to join this virtual seminar today. And I want to, again, thank you for joining us. That aside, I want to take a personal point of privilege right now and say thank you to everybody in our little group, our conference members who were very, very supportive with me when they learned of my mother's passing. And I want to thank all of them individually for their support and their prayers and their virtual hugs and everything else. And so just know that you continue to be in my heart. So that being said, because we have such little time and this man is just fantastic, I just want to quickly introduce you to Dr. Steve Cushions, who is a senior research fellow at the University College of London Institute for or of the Americas. He has published work on Cuban and Grenadian revolutions, resistance movements in the Second World War, and reparations for African enslavement. His forthcoming book, to be published by Monthly Review Press, is entitled Slavery in the British Empire and Its Legacy in the Modern World. He is a committee member of Caribbean Labor Solidarity and is a delegate to the Reparations Steering Group of London East and South East region of the Trades Union Council in the UK. He is a member of the University and College Union. So I just want to say welcome to Steve. We appreciate you volunteering your time like this. And just for everyone to know, this idea of reparations is not something that is new to our theology group. It is something that we have discussed in the past. And so we look forward to learning from Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you for the invitation. It's much appreciated. So today I shall start by looking at the way the Church of England deals with memorials to enslavers. Then a short detour into the role of the parish church in the Caribbean in the time of slavery. Then two examples of the way the church deals with financial reparations. Excuse me. Christopher Codrington and the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel and the South Sea Company. Finally, I'll give a brief look at nonconformist missionaries. Right, there's a memorial to Thomas Corker, who lived from 1669 to 1700 in the Church of King Charles the Martyr in Falmouth. He was an agent for the Royal African Company in West Africa, where he married a member of the local African ruling class and started a dynasty of slave traders. A pamphlet outlining his connection to trafficking in enslaved Africans and a local campaign both called upon the church to remove the memorial. Local activists mounted a brass plaque beneath the memorial saying, Thomas Corker was England's chief agent for the Royal African Company on the York Island. He oversaw and profited from the kidnap, enslavement and sale of slaves. The Royal African Company shipped more enslaved men, women and children to the Americas than any other trading company in the world. Responding to the plaque, a spokesman for the church said, we don't feel this is helpful at all and detracts from the very good and inclusive work we are doing. And they added that that putting that plaque up unofficially caused unnecessary distress. A local campaign group calling itself Remove Slave Trader Memorial in Falmouth said, it appears that the church feels no duty to understand the role that they are playing in upholding white supremacy. and would rather bury their heads in the sand and dodge any accountability of the pain that the memorial causes. To do so is an act of denial of the central role of the Church of England and Falmouth, that the Church of England and Falmouth played in the slave trade. So, and I think we have to look at this in the context of the number of parish churches that there are in England that were built with money made either in the business of slavery or in the East India trade. There's another memorial in the church causing problems, one Tobias Rustat, who gave over £10,000 to the Church of England and to Jesus College, University of Cambridge. Clearly a man much concerned about his own reputation amongst future generations. So his donations to the church can be seen as just really so much. Every Sunday, the constables, church wardens and sidesmen were to walk and search taverns, alehouses, victualling houses and other houses where they do suspect debauched company to frequent. If they found anyone drinking, swearing, gaming or otherwise misdemeaning themselves, they brought them to the stocks to be imprisoned for the space of 4 hours. I mentioned Christopher Codrington. Well, Christopher Codrington bequeathed a profitable sugar estate in Barbados and 300 enslaved labourers to the church's missionary wing. If it wasn't for his will, Christopher Codrington might have entered history as just one more plantation owner and colonial administrator, albeit perhaps slightly more cultivated and a little less brutal than most of his fellows. Christopher Codrington left his estates in Barbados with 315 enslaved workers to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, which was founded by King William III in 1701 as the official overseas missionary arm of the Church of England. This latter bequest was worth £30,000, which is the equivalent of 90 million in today's money, and produced an income of £2,000 a year, which is the equivalent of £6 million a year in today's money. As far as Codrington himself is concerned, there was no regret about how he made his money, no change of heart about his treatment of his enslaved labourers, just a mawkish sentimentality about religion and a practical realisation of its ideological effectiveness. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel inserted into the intended baptism ritual for enslaved converts, "You declare in the presence of God and before this congregation that you do not ask for holy baptism out of any desire to free yourself from the duty and obedience you owe your master while you live, but merely for the good of your soul, and partake in the grace and blessings promised to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ." However, making profits and making converts proved incompatible. With the Bible in one hand and the whip in the other, by 1726, 16 years after the death of Christopher Codrington, not one of the Society's slaves had been baptized. The practice of branding the word society in the chests of all enslaved labourers coming into the possession of the Society cannot have endeared these missionaries to the potential convert. Whether Christopher Codrington actually cared for the spiritual welfare of the enslaved or not, we cannot know. If, however, the purpose of his legacy to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel was to secure his good name for future generations, then he was remarkably successful. And Codrington College in Barbados is still named after this family of enslavers. The United Society Partners in the Gospel, as the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel is now known, announced last year, USPG is committed to telling the whole truth about the past, apologising for and repenting of this history, and expressing deep remorse for the Society's actions, for the historic damage and also for the intergenerational legacies. USPG commits to working in close partnership with the Codrington Trust as the governing body of the Codrington Estate and College. The Codrington Trust advanced proposals for a programme of reparatory activities and an investment of 18 million Barbados dollars. That's £7 million sterling over a period of 10 to 15 years. Well, let's do the maths. 300 enslaved labourers held from 1712 to 1838, that's 126 years. The average wage for an English agricultural labourer at the time was £20 a year. This gives an unpaid wages bill of 750,000, worth 1.5 billion in today's money. So 7 million is chicken feed, really, but worse. In my view, the Codrington Trust has decided how much they will give. This is philanthropy at its worst. Such charity allows the perpetrator to determine the amount and the manner of which the profits of their crimes are distributed. The church decides on worthy recipients, not the descendants of the enslaved. On the 5th of September 2024, the Codrington Trust and the USPG announced their 11-member steering committee to govern and oversee renewal and reconciliation, the Codrington Project. The steering committee will provide guidance for the operation of the project, receiving and reviewing from the executive committee and making recommendations to the two trustee boards. They also say they are working in partnership, in continuous collaboration, and will listen with descendants of the enslaved to decide on appropriate action for this project to ensure that they, those who will be directly impacted are consulted. Well, we have here guidance, recommendations, consultation, but in the end, the Codrington Trust and the USPG will decide. Does not give any control over the fund to those African descended communities, and thus the money remains firmly in the hands of the Codrington Trust. The church still thinks it knows best what's good for you, and they haven't even taken the simple step of changing the name of the college. The Barbados government's National Task Force on Reparations have criticised the United Society partners in the gospel for not negotiating the terms nor the amount of the payments with them. David Comissong, chair of the National Task Force on Reparations, is quoted as saying that organisations such as USPG should understand that reparations are not about them unilaterally determining what compensation they are prepared to make. We have a similar outcome from the Church of England. In 2023, the Church Commissioners, the financing arm of the Church of England, published their research into historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery. This acknowledged the Church's historic complicity in trafficking in enslaved Africans through the profits it had made from a fund known as Queen Anne's Bounty, which was established in 1704 by Queen Anne to help poor Anglican clergy. This fund, invested in African chattel enslavement, took donations derived from investments made by the church in the South Sea Company. The church commissioners said they would make 100 million available, which again is pretty small beer compared with the modern value of the money the report identified as coming from the profits of these investments. In the period 1708 to 1793, that income amounted to 633,000. By the method the report used to convert contemporary sums into modern day value, this would amount to 1,361,000. Sorry, 1,361 million. While admitting the inadequacy of the fund, the report states that our aspiration is that it would invest boldly in black-led businesses whose brilliance will shame the financial sector that has shunned them. We foresee its grants energising social entrepreneurs and philanthropists. We have clearly been told that 100 million is all the money that is available, placing the responsibility for the growth of the fund on the asset managers that the church will itself select. Thus, we see the totally pro-business orientation of the fund, but nothing here for workers or poor farmers. This approach will enrich the African Caribbean bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie, and the workers will be lucky to get the crumbs from the table. The report does not give any control of the fund to African descended communities. Thus, the money remains again firmly under the control of the church commissioners. They're quite specific about this. There is little in the report that would do anything to improve the lot of workers or poor farmers of African heritage, either in the United Kingdom or the Caribbean. There's no indication that any of the fund will in any way benefit or help develop economically the countries of the Caribbean. It seems likely that the overwhelming bulk of the money will be used in the UK to raise more money. And that will be used to raise yet more in the endless cycle of accumulation. That's really the basis of capitalism. So this is a warning. When we eventually get near to winning the fight for reparation, we shall need to be extra vigilant to ensure that any money is used to benefit all of the descendants of the enslaved Africans and for the development and for real development programs in the Caribbean. Otherwise, they will launder the money back into the financial service industry, enriching the already rich, while the poor see little or no benefit. So let's have a look to compare this with the history of the nonconformist missionaries. While the missionaries preached deference to authority, their assumption that the enslaved were capable of rationally choosing salvation and participating in church activities unintentionally undermined the ideology of the enslavers. Despite the teaching of the missionaries that enslaved workers should be good servants, there was a disruptive potential in the message of liberating souls from the bondage of sin. This could easily be translated in the possibility of liberating people from the bondage to enslavers. This led to the creation of more or less underground sects, such as the Native Baptists, that interpreted the Bible in their own way. Frequently, the leaders of these sects were also active in the unofficial missions, which served as cover and provided, the official missions, which served as cover and provided organizational bases. The political consciousness necessary for resistance and rebellion came to a fruition under the leadership of these sects as religious conviction matured into political action, most particularly in the 1831 general strike in Jamaica, led by Sam Sharp, which became known as the Baptist War. So finally, let me just finish with a quote from John Wesley, who wrote in his book, Thoughts Upon Slavery. And I do this as an argument for people who say, well, nobody opposed it at the time. It was He wrote, "The blood of thy brother crieth against thee from the earth, from the ship and from the waters. Oh, whatever it costs, put a stop to its cry before it is too late. Instantly, at any price, were it the half of your goods, deliver thyself from blood guiltiness." I don't think it's say fairer than that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that we don't have enough time to really discuss all these issues, and I'm urging everyone in the Zoom to, as we chat here, I'm giving you 3 minutes to come up with your questions or your comments, right? But what I wanted to kind of talk to you about is, because I'm in South Carolina, and so the issue of reparations is certainly one that's been discussed, especially among the Gullah Geechee community, who have seen over the years their access to their land or family plots been stripped through various kind of cunning ways by developers and government officials. So I'm wondering, in your view, how does a church, the big church, whether it's Anglican or Catholic or whatever, how do we even begin to think about what reparations should look like? Because I've heard people talk about this idea of cash payments or access to healthcare or education. And I can see issues with all of them, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
My thoughts, now bear in mind, as someone who is a citizen of the ex-colonial power, if you will, needs to be seen in that context. My view is that the first step must be negotiations between representatives of the descendants of enslaved Africans and the governments of the old colonial powers. The very act of negotiating is an act of respect, and that I think is really important. So it's a question of finding what's the people most affected themselves want. Now, I know there can be a problem with governments doing this sort of thing, as we've seen in the past. Not the governments of the Caribbean and Africa haven't always been the I shall avoid the libel laws here, but that haven't. But you know what I mean. But I think what. So I would actually think that there is a role for a mass movement in the Caribbean and in various, amongst the descendants of the enslaved in other parts of the Americas, to put pressure upon their governments to actually, sort of negotiate for what they want and not what the government thinks ought to be done. A and B, I think that there's a role for people in Britain to put pressure on our government to begin those negotiations, do them in good faith, put some real money on the table, because governments are never really they're never really sorry till it costs them in the purse. And from my point of view, it's ensuring that in Britain, certainly, the people who really made the money out of, the banks, the insurance companies, those big corporations that still exist, some of the big land-owning noble families, be the ones that pay the money that it will cost to put these things right.
Okay. So I'm going to put a pin in my follow-up question, and I'm going to ask, I think, Father Dom, you have a question in the chat. Would you mind just asking it out loud? And for the rest of the participants, please raise your hands and I will call on you as I see you.
Yes, yeah. Video on top.
Father Don? Well, I'll read his question in the meantime. How do you propose reparations benefit all, starting with the poor first? And most proportionately rather than a select group. And I think that was going to be part of my follow-up question, right? Because if we're saying we need governments to negotiate, or that people organize, a lot of the times the folks who are organizing are people who are quote unquote elite or something like that. And so I have, and I think many of us have real concerns about making sure that any form of reparations is equitable. And I know from where I sit in this part of the world, that might be a dirty word, but I think it's important for us to kind of think about. So I don't know if you want to address that.
My grandmother always used to say, the Lord helps those who help themselves. And I think that what I was saying about, and this is what is lacking to an extent, is we need a mass movement. Now, we deal with the Caribbean. This morning, I was actually talking to a member of the Barbados Parliament who's in Britain for an anti-racist conference. We've been discussing anything that we in Britain can do to assist people like him building a mass movement. Now, in Barbados, when the government talked about giving £3 million to Drax for his plantation, and there was an outcry in Barbados. There was an outcry in lots of places as well, but there was a particular outcry in Barbados. The government backtracked immediately. Oh, that wasn't what we meant. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. Now, I think that's a small example of the way a popular movement in the Caribbean and elsewhere, you speak of South Carolina, is essential to ensure that to hold leaders to account. And it can be, and that small example shows that it can be done.
Okay. All right. Winston, I see your hand is up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, go ahead.
I will make 3 short points. 1, it is unfortunate that we are still thinking of reparation in terms of financial compensation for a few persons identified. and we are not considering the rights denied during the period of slavery and since slavery, neither the brutality administered to the slaves. Now, the other issue that I would like to raise, well, there's two other issues. One is I would like to have access to the volumes provided by the researcher.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is that in the Caribbean, CARICOM has taken up the central role of being the instrument, together with the University of the West Indies, mainly in Barbados and Jamaica. But other people, like myself, have been active. I have been active in taking the issue of reparation to the Anglican Church itself. I have given lectures here in Trinidad and both in San Fernando and I've continued the lecturing. And this is one of the points just raised by the gentleman, the question of developing a mass-based organization, which I consider this is what I had been doing. And the other issue is that I think somebody you mentioned, or was it the gentleman, that there's need for us to identify what the diaspora, particularly the diaspora in the UK and in Europe, can do in this fight. This whole question of popularizing. Right now, King Charles did agree after he was confronted some years ago, and after his two sons were accosted in Jamaica on the question of reparation, he expressed his willingness to get involved and he didn't say anything specifically about what or how. But I think that we have to look at three agencies. The Commonwealth, the role of the Commonwealth of Nations, which brings together a lot of the African countries and the Caribbean territory. In other words, we have to focus our work also on what that agency does. The other issue would be there's a reluctance now that although King Charles has promised in a kind of way to be sympathetic, I can't remember what exact word he used, and the government of England and the Conservative Party itself have said, and the Labour Party have said that they are not in the business of reparation.
All right, Winston, can we give Dr. Cushions a minute to kind of respond to some of what you've said? And I think we have some other folks as well.
Right. I raised the question of actually the finance of the unpaid wages, partly because that's a way that we have been arguing it in Britain, certainly within the trade union movement, because every active trade unionist understands the need to fight for unpaid wages. So that's actually sort of a propaganda piece, if you will. But also, we're quite clear that it will need money to put right the wrongs. The right that you spoke of, the denial of rights, quite rightly, the torture, the disruption of denial of family life, etc., etc., etc. But and the legacy of that, it will cost money to put that right, and that's why I think that we are talking in financial terms. In terms of CARICOM and the Commonwealth, yeah, I mean, they are the ones who have taken it up, and there's not much that we in Britain can do kind of about it. What we are trying to do in terms of popularising it in Britain is we've been very active in the trade union movement. The Railway Workers Union, the RMT, has funded an annual reparations conference for the last 18 years. They have been very committed to it. We have been speaking to various quite senior officials of trade unions, but also speaking at regional conferences, and so on, and so on. And that is now becoming quite an important field of discussion. My own trade union, the University and College Lecturers Union, has, they passed a motion at its annual congress last year. Wonderful motion. I mean, then of course everyone goes, big round of applause, and that's kind of forgotten. But it did open up the ability for activists within the union, particularly within the black workers section of the union, to actually start facing this and sort of demanding that the officialdom do something about it. Finally, to say that we are organising, not we in this case, it's an organisation called Stand Up to Racism, is the initiator of this, is going to organise a conference next March about in Britain, but we're bringing some speakers over from the Caribbean. We've got the support of the National Education Union, which is the principal teachers union, have offered us their big hall for the conference, and so on. So I think it's actually whereas, I mean, the fact that the Labour Party aren't in business about helping, well, some of us wonder if they're in the business of helping anybody, but we're going to have to force them. And we're going to have to force them. That's what we're starting to do, to put pressure on them. And if the pressure can come both from governments that they have to deal with, knowing that there's a mass movement there pushing those governments. Meanwhile, there is a growing movement in Britain, then I think, well, we might be able to force them to change their minds.
Okay, great. I think we have another question, and I'm not sure if this is from Angelo. And then afterwards, Nathaniel is asking a very direct question. Angelo, is that your question? So I will okay, so Angelo, please unmute if you can. I think people are fed up of hearing my voice. Oh, he can't. So I will read this. What active steps can the church take today, clergy and laity, to realize the idea of reparations and restorative justice? Not such a easy question, but we defer to you.
Yeah, I join in with other groups. Spread the word. Sort of go out into the community. Invite people in. Churches are great places to hold public meetings in. And so on. So I think that's it will depend entirely on the area, on the local traditions, and so on. But I think that the church is an organisation that has a following, and that they can be a force for, and they can be a force for change. But if they use their community and go out into the rest of the community. Nathaniel said the date of the Reparations Conference in March 2025, not quite sure yet. The idea only really surfaced on last Saturday's Stand Up to Racism conference, where Daniel Kebede, who's General Secretary of the National Education Union, apparently got up and said, well, we'll support it and you can have. So there's an organising meeting on a Zoom organising meeting, I think sometime in early December. Then once it's known, and it to an extent, although they've offered us the hall, it will depend upon when it's available, of course, and so on. I will make sure that I tell Alison, and seeing as I'm separately in contact with Nathaniel, I can let you know.
So I think one of the things that for many of us, and you kind of, you hinted, or you actually mentioned this in your presentation. You talked about this idea of baptism, right? And what was embedded in the baptismal vows, I guess, to ensure that any African who chose to be baptized would not also claim freedom, right? So I wonder if in any other of your work, as you've done your research here, have you seen instances where this whole idea of the baptized person being thought of Christian and therefore should not be enslaved, was debated within the context, or was it just very quickly, squashed in your own research?
Well, it started, I mean, the original Christian justification came from a statement of the Pope in 14 something, which where he spoke a papal bull, where he spoke of the right to enslave Saracens, pagans, and other heathens. And so in the early days of the actual the business of slavery in the Caribbean, they did refer to Christians and slaves, or Christians and heathens. But it was only when, but that fairly quickly realised that there was a danger there, and so they that was when they started. They invented the concept of whiteness, if you will. It's. I read an interesting article the other day entitled "How the Irish Became White," which sort of I think sums up the way these things change. But they didn't even. They got this from the Spanish, who referred to negros and blancos. They didn't even bother to translate Negro. And so by the time of 1670 something, the first Barbados slave code, the Virginia slave code, and so on, they were definitely talking about slaves and white people, and they got right away from this idea, and it was very much and one of the reasons that it was said that actually the slaveholders were much more concerned about the missionaries teaching the enslaved laborers to read, because they thought that was the real danger.
Right.
And it proved to be so later, as enslaved domestic laborers read newspapers and realized what was going on in England and so on, and but I think that's the it very quickly moved away from that, and particularly once the church itself started to own enslaved laborers, and there were a large number, particularly the richer clergy in England, had investments in plantations. Then the old saying that they struggled with their conscience, but they won.
Okay, so Rose, and just as an aside, what some folks didn't know is that Steve and I started to talk about this book called Afro-Atlantic Catholics by DeWolf, which is also kind of tries to tackle this. But Rose Allen asks, have you kept up with the reparations movement in the Dutch? In 2022, the Dutch Prime Minister issued a formal apology, followed by an apology by the King of the Netherlands in 2023. Currently, various initiatives are underway to give meaningful substance to this movement. While these actions are significant, the reparations movement has also faced challenges, as some leaders and communities have voiced dissatisfaction with the scope of the government's reparatory efforts. So go ahead, Steve. It's all yours.
I think the Dutch government have taken a small step, one quite large step bigger than the British government, as Winston pointed out earlier, has taken. They've taken a small step, and I think there's a chink there. But to say that you know that we the reparations movement go, oh, thank you very much, you know, and touch their forelocks is, you know, no. It's a small step, and speaking as a trade unionist, once the employer starts to give something, you know you can push harder and get more.
Okay. So again, reparations has taken on various forms, right? So I don't know, Steve, if you can address some of these issues, for example, returning artifacts, cultural artifacts and other things to communities, right? Because again, within the kind of museum and world, this has become a big debate. And quite frankly, I don't know that the British Museum would have much left if things were returned to their spaces. So again, I wonder if, as we talk about reparations, we're just talking about it. We're still very separate in our conversations. And what will it take to bring people together? Because to me, everybody's messy and dirty in this.
I think, as far as cultural artifacts are concerned, my partner's Australian, and she frequently speaks about the scandal of the bones of Indigenous Australians' ancestors being kept in museums, and how painful that is to a people whose ancestors are sacred to them. So, you know, that's just one sort of aspect of it, but I think that's a really important thing. You're right about the British Museum. Someone once described it as the biggest receiver of stolen goods in the world. They now the British law forbids nationally funded museums from returning artifacts. So you may have heard of the Elgin marbles, you know, that Lord Elgin stole from off the Parthenon in Greece. And are still, you know.
Yeah, my partner's Greek, so we always have that.
Right, yes, I'm right, good. I'm sure you know the line on that one. Yes, and so on. But so it's there's and of course museums can hide behind that. There's the Horniman Museum in South London, which is an anthropological museum. Now, anthropology is, you know, that's the whole thing is fraught, isn't it? You know, I mean, the whole discipline is deeply conflicted. But the Horniman Museum has quite a lot of Benin bronzes. So what they've done is they have entered into an arrangement with a national museum in Ghana, where still technically they are the property of the Horniman Museum because the law requires it to be that. But that the majority of them have been returned to Ghana, where they're there, you know, on display, and a few have been kept in Britain, and then they swap back and forth, and they, you know, so that all that can be seen. So I mean, there are imaginative ways around this. I mean, if you want to do something decent, that the law doesn't permit you to, there's always an imaginative way of doing it.
The letter, rather, and sometimes the spirit. So very quickly, someone privately asked me, why is anthropology flawed? And I will say, as an anthropologist, anthropology is a messy social science that by and large was born out of a colonial mindset. Many people who became anthropologists were actual colonial officers who were sent to collect information, or agents to collect information to help suppress indigenous communities. So that's my quick and dirty about anthropology. And we're ugly. You know, our history is ugly. We own it. We just have to face that fact. So Marcia says the Anglican Church in this province is concerned to be the leaven for a diverse community seeking to counter the problems of disunity, economic dependence, and foreign domination. As the society seeks to unite, the church seeks to keep alive issues of justice, peace, and the integrity of life. So go ahead, Marcia, your hand is raised.
Yes, hello to everybody from Barbados. Here in Barbados. I posted that because I think that we need to hold the Diocese of the West Indies to this statement. And if this statement has worth to them and to the community in the West Indies, one would expect that they would actively join the lobby to address the Church of England and reparations for African enslavement, and that they would do it within each of the countries in the West Indies, that the head of the various church in every island would consistently and publicly address and support publicly the movement that clearly is very much buoyed by, as Steve shared, the UK trade union movement fighting for unpaid wages, and the Church of England having done an audit on the Queen's Anne bounty and exposed that for public viewing, because a link to that document is available online, so that persons can understand the role and the financial prowess gained by the Church of England from the enslavement of persons in their colonies. And the process is used throughout the periods of enslavement and colonization. So I am interested in what and in how the West Indies Diocese is supporting the movement for reparations for African enslavement. And here in Barbados, I have had the privilege, in inverted commas, of hearing the bishop here speak about aspects of Christianity, even by stating that there was a church in one of the castles on the West Coast above the area that the enslaved people were being held for weeks before they were put on ships. And he spoke about it in the context that it was a place of divine worship for those enslavers at that particular fort/castle/export base. And I have never heard a strong position coming from the local Anglican organization on a consistent basis to the public, furthermore to their congregations. Up to recently, a member of the Church of England was here, and he was within one of the churches. I observed him. I purposely went to observe him, and he was interested in the artistic quality of the plaques on the wall and the inlaid plaques in the floor, and sharing his information from an artistic point of view to the congregants and those who came to hear what he had to say. And in the flyer and his opening remarks, he made it quite clear that we would all be receiving some type of education on the artistic value of these items and not the persons named on the plaques. And I consider that a slap in the face of the reparations movement, a slap in the face of the Republic of Barbados, a slap in the face of all the congregants in that assembly and the clergy, who a majority of those people don't know that those plaques, the names on those plaques are names of people who were murderers, rapists, abusers. Not only the people named on those plaques, but all their families for centuries. And without giving that knowledge, but given the knowledge on the artistic value in 2024, to me speaks volumes about the position of the Diocese of the West Indies and more directly, the Anglican Church in Barbados, to even allow that to happen. Thank you.
First of all, Marcia, I want to just thank you for sharing that, because I can hear the pain in your voice. And I think this is why we are trying to engage with this, because this is painful. And for many of us, it is not just because the churches we do or do not belong to have a historic link to this, but also in our very bodies, our very families, we embody this experience. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that. And I hope that, this is something that we can continue. Steve, do you want to address?
No, I think Marcia put it very well. I think, yes, this business of, whether something's actually art or not, and so on. In a slightly different context, we've had here in Britain big debates over what they call stately homes, the country houses that that people, that a good half of them were built with money from either enslavement or from the East India Company, and there's been a real split within the National Trust, which owns many of them, between those who say we must face up to this, and those who say, oh, come on, no, this is our glorious heritage, and so on. And I think there is a battle to be fought over this argument. And just on a slightly lighter note, one of my friends, Helen Bates, managed to get a grant to take young people with learning difficulties, mainly of either African, Caribbean or South Asian heritage, on tours of stately homes. And then about halfway round, one of them, who'd been elected by their others, would put their hand up and say, how much of this beautiful stuff was built on the backs of slavery? And the guide who was showing them round sometimes would go, well, moving on, and sort of move them on. And other times would go, oh, I'm glad you've asked that, and then really kind of go into it. So I think there's been this kind of, and a bit of kind of activism like this, to actually, sort of, now I know that's more, sort of a bit more activism on the question of what these memorials, or whatever they are, what they what they stand for, can actually be very useful as a way of actually making the argument. There's a museum in Hackney in East London called the Museum of the Home, that was originally called the Jeffrey Museum, because it was in what had previously been almshouses that had been erected in the 1680s by one Sir Robert Jeffrey, who was a slave trader, and his statue is there. Now, there's been an on and off campaign for the last 5 or 6 years to have that statue removed, and the museum has resisted it, the government has forbidden them to move it, and so on. So the local campaigners got me to write a pamphlet about the history of it. The local education union bought 500 copies of it and distributed it around schools. And so we were able to use that memorial, that monument, as a way of actually speaking of the whole history. And it did prove quite useful. You know, I think in the end they would have wished they had got rid of it, because it would have been easier.
Marcia, 2 minutes, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah, so I just also like to share that I can certainly identify with parts of what Steve said just now. Here in Barbados, I was in the company of a British author who I was assisting with some research, and we went to a particular plantation house in Barbados that is open to the public and to tourists, etc., etc. And the tour guide informed us in the group that we were with that slavery ended in Barbados in 1865. And my attempts thereafter to speak with the manager who she reported to and have that corrected completely failed. If I go up there today, and that was in 2020, if I go up there today, that was in January 2020, I am pretty confident that she's probably saying the same thing. Secondly, with regards to the commemorative plaques on the wall, within the walls of the churches in Barbados, the ancient churches in Barbados, I would like to certainly state that no mention was made that enslaved labor would have lifted all of that wonderful marble with all its wonderful artwork on it and lifted it, held it, and helped erect it. And neither was it meant, never have I heard any Anglican churches in Barbados holding any events that speak to not only the names of those persons on those plaques and their families as enslavers and sharing the numbers of people that they had owned at 1834, how much money they all gained, etc., etc. But never have I even heard them say that these churches were publicly say in any forum for the public to attend that these churches were built on the backs of enslaved people, literally. Enslaved people lifted those coral stones and put them all up. And that the beautiful woodwork inside was done by enslaved people. None of this is done publicly. And all of this would help educate the public and certainly the Anglican congregants. And therefore, it would allow for more people to become attuned and perhaps embrace the whole concept that the Church of England and reparations is inseparable, and that the West Indies Diocese has to publicly support it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I really hope that this is going to be an ongoing discussion, because one of the things that we have not addressed, for example, is how even this idea of reparations needs to have or include in a discussion how some religious groups were targeted and marginalized and made illegal for all intents and purposes. And I can think about in the context of the spiritual Baptist or Risha faiths in Trinidad. And I think this is something, again, that we need to kind of start to talk about some more. So Steve, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to wind up and give us your last thought.
No, I think, thank you very much for inviting me. It's, I think links between people in Britain and people in the Caribbean, and of course we always forget about you know, that South Carolina started as a British colony, of course, as well, you know, and so but these links can be very fruitful, and I think we need to carry on pursuing this. So thank you very much, Alison, for inviting me, and we will stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.